poor man sold his carpentry shop to send his twin daughters to school. 25 years later they came to. Hello everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories. John Duncan's heart shattered as the sterile white walls of St. Bridget's Hospital closed in around him. His wife, Sarah, had died giving birth to their twin daughters, leaving him alone with two fragile lives cradled in his arms. The frantic beeping of the monitors, which had once been a rhythm of hope, faded into a haunting silence as he looked down at the tiny girls, Emma and Olivia, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. He hadn't expected this. He had imagined holding his son, naming him Daniel, the child he had promised to raise alongside Sarah. Instead, he found himself in the quiet, empty room, the weight of Sarah's absence pressing down on him with a suffocating force. "I will take care of you," he whispered to the babies, his voice cracking with grief. The vow was all he had left, the only thing he could offer them in a world now so cruelly stripped of the love he had known. With no family to turn to, no mother, no father to lean on, John was left with nothing but a heart full of love and a stubborn resolve. The house they had planned together stood cold and quiet, the echo of Sarah's laughter now a distant memory. But the warmth of the twins in his arms was all the comfort he needed. His hands, once skilled at carving wood into beautiful furniture, now fumbled through the motions of fatherhood. He stitched diapers from old sheets, boiled water in rusted pots, and learned to swaddle with clumsy hands, his heart aching with each mistake. The community, quick to pass judgment, spoke in hushed tones behind his back. "He's a fool," they said. "He'll sell everything for girls. What kind of man does that?" They called him crazy, but John didn't care. He sold all their belongings, the house, the land, everything he had worked for, to make sure Emma and Olivia would have the chance to go to school. It didn't matter what they said. He couldn't give them their mother back, but he could give them a future. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The nights were long and often sleepless. John would stand at the doorway of the girls' room, watching them sleep, whispering stories about Sarah, the woman who loved mango pies, who could laugh louder than church bells, and who had died so that they might live. Each night, as he rocked the twins in the cradle, he reminded himself that this was his purpose now. He would raise them, he would love them, and no matter how many sleepless nights or cold meals he had to endure, he would never, ever fail them. The promise he made to Sarah in that sterile hospital room became his life's work. There would be no turning back. His heart was broken, but his determination had never been clearer. The world could mock him all it wanted. He would raise his daughters, and they would grow strong, smart, and full of life. They would be everything Sarah had dreamed of, everything John had promised to give them. And with each day, that promise grew more sacred, more unbreakable. The days following Sarah's death were a blur of exhaustion and relentless determination. John Duncan's hands, once deft and steady, now trembled as he navigated the chaos of single fatherhood. He could hear the sound of his daughters' cries echoing through the empty house, a constant reminder of his new reality. The weight of their small, fragile bodies in his arms was overwhelming, but it was the only weight he would ever willingly bear. With no one else to help, he learned to do everything Sarah had once done for them. The diapers, the feedings, the late-night cries, the lonely silence of the house grew louder as John stumbled through each new task. He wasn't prepared for any of it, but he couldn't afford to stop. The community's judgment, their whispered words behind his back, could not touch him. They said he was foolish, that a man alone couldn't possibly care for two girls. They mocked him for selling everything, for giving up his livelihood just to send them to school. "You'll regret it," they'd say. "They'll grow up, get married, and leave you behind." But John didn't care. Their words didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the promise he had made to Sarah, and he would keep it. He would raise these girls with every ounce of love and strength he had. There were days when John would wake in the dead of night, the twins still small and needing him, and find himself consumed with fear. What if he wasn't enough? What if he failed them? But he would silence those fears with the sound of his own voice, reminding himself, "I will take care of you." And when the world felt too heavy, when he thought he couldn't carry it all anymore, he found solace in the simplest moments, watching his daughters sleep, their tiny bodies curled up together, peaceful and unaware of the struggles they had yet to face. He would trace the curve of their small faces with his eyes, whispering promises into the night. He would make them laugh with stories about their mother, the woman who had loved mango pie and whose laughter had been as loud as church bells. Those stories, though painful, became his anchor, his way of keeping Sarah alive in the hearts of their daughters. The struggle was far from over. His carpenter's shop had become an afterthought, a distant memory of a life he had once known. But John would not be defeated. The town, for all its judgment, couldn't break him. He worked tirelessly, sometimes carving in the early hours of the morning, sometimes late into the night. He crafted wooden toys for the girls, his hands shaped by love rather than the precision of a master craftsman. As the months passed, Emma and Olivia grew stronger. Their chubby little faces lit up with smiles when they saw him. Their father, their protector. And slowly, despite the doubts of everyone around him, John began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was doing something right. With each small milestone, Emma's first word, Olivia's first steps, he found his resolve harden. The quiet confidence that he could do this, that he could give his daughters everything Sarah had dreamed of for them. But just as quickly as the small victories came, they were followed by moments of despair. At the twins' first checkup, the nurse had marveled at how well they were doing, how healthy they were, but John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was missing something. He wasn't a mother. He wasn't Sarah. How could he possibly fill that void? The answer came from unexpected sources. Mrs. Parker, a midwife from town, had been the one to help him through those early days, pressing bottles of donor milk into his hands when he was sure he couldn't go on. Her kindness had stunned him, and it was that same humanity, that sense of community, that kept him going. Soon, other women from the town came forward to help. They washed clothes, they brought food, they even taught him how to soothe the babies when they cried. John had resisted their help at first, his pride getting in the way, but he soon realized that he couldn't do it alone. The women who came to his door weren't just helping him, they were helping his daughters, giving them the love and care they needed. And though it was difficult for him to accept, John began to see that it was okay to rely on others sometimes. They were all in this together. One small village, one large, invisible family. As Emma and Olivia grew, John's life became a blur of carpentry orders, baby bottles, and the constant hum of daily life. The house was always messy, cluttered with scraps of wood and scattered toys. But to John, it was home. The community may have called him foolish. They may have whispered behind his back, but John no longer cared. He had found something far more important than the judgment of others. He had found love. A love that no amount of hardship could erase. And every time his daughters smiled, every time their tiny hands reached up for him, he knew he had made the right choice. Even when the days were long, and the nights longer still, John Duncan stood firm in his resolve. He would raise these girls. He would give them everything. And they would know, always, that their father's love was unshakable, unwavering, and unbreakable. John Duncan's hopes for a second chance at happiness were shattered as quickly as they had been built. After years of raising his daughters alone, the weight of the responsibility was taking its toll. The thought of a partnership, a new beginning for their small family, had begun to take root in his heart. Though it was never for love, it was for survival. Someone to help him bear the burden of raising Emma and Olivia. Someone to share the load of what had become a lonely, exhausting life. That's when he met Julia. She was soft-spoken, a recent widow with a gentle smile that warmed him on even the coldest days. Her quiet understanding of the challenges he faced as a single father seemed like a gift. She praised his work, admired his craftsmanship, and, more importantly, she seemed to truly care about his daughters. For 6 sweet months, John allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found the happiness they so desperately needed. Julia would be the mother they lacked, and his daughters would finally have the family they deserved. But reality, as it so often does, arrived with the harshest of truths. One humid Thursday, John came home after a long day in the workshop, exhausted and covered in sawdust, only to hear the unmistakable sound of screams coming from inside the house. His heart pounded in his chest as he raced toward the source. The sight before him more horrifying than anything he could have imagined. Julia stood over Emma and Olivia, brandishing a wooden spoon, her face twisted with anger. "Bastard twins," she spat, her voice venomous. "You spilled oil on my new rug." Emma was crying, her small body trembling. while Olivia stood protectively in front of her sister. A fierce determination in her eyes despite her fear. The sight of his daughters, his precious girls, being treated like this struck John like a physical blow. His entire body surged with rage, his blood running hot. Without thinking, he stepped between them, his voice trembling but filled with authority. "Touch them again, Julia, and you'll answer to me and to God." Julia's eyes narrowed with disdain, her words laced with cruelty. "You think anyone will want a man cursed with motherless girls?" she sneered. With a final, spiteful glance, she packed her belongings and left before dawn, slamming the door behind her with a force that rattled the house. John stood there, shaking with fury, unable to comprehend the woman he had trusted had turned into someone who would cause his daughters so much pain. The neighbors would gossip, of course. They would say it was another failed marriage, another poor choice on his part. But John didn't care. He couldn't care anymore. The shame of his failed marriage faded in comparison to the burning need to protect Emma and Olivia. They were his everything. The next morning, before the sun even rose, John knelt beside their beds, his voice low and steady, but filled with the weight of a vow renewed. "Never again," he whispered, "will I gamble with your safety. You are my everything." His heart clenched as he kissed their foreheads, the promise heavy on his chest. From that moment on, John was more resolute than ever. The memory of Julia's cruel departure faded like a shadow in the light of his unbreakable bond with his daughters. He would never let them suffer like that again. He would be their protector, their father and mother, all rolled into one. They would never have to fear abandonment or neglect. He would do whatever it took to make sure they grew up strong and safe. He threw himself into his work with a new sense of purpose. Every furniture piece he carved, every nail he hammered, was a step toward securing their future. The shop, the wood, the work, it was all for them. Emma and Olivia were thriving. They laughed, they played, they learned. Their joy filled the air, driving away the shadows that had once hung over their home. The world might call him foolish. They might call him naive. But John Duncan didn't care. His daughters were growing up with love, with hope, and with the belief that they could achieve anything. He wasn't just raising them, he was shaping their future. A future that would never be marred by the scars of the past. He had promised Sarah he would take care of them, and he was doing just that. One day, one painstakingly carved piece of furniture at a time, he would never fail them again. John Duncan's life, once so solid and grounded, now felt like a constant battle between survival and the overwhelming weight of responsibility. After Julia's abrupt departure, he threw himself into his work with an intensity that left little room for anything else. His carpentry shop, once a thriving business, was now a shell of what it had been. The world outside seemed to shift around him as he clung desperately to the one thing he knew best, his hands. His craft, the furniture he created, the toys he carved, became more than just wood and nails. They were the embodiment of his devotion to Emma and Olivia. He was doing everything he could to give them a future. But the struggle was becoming harder with every passing day. The winters were particularly brutal. The heat from the stove was never enough to chase away the cold that seeped into the walls. And the growing stack of unpaid bills sat like a constant reminder of just how little he had left. He barely slept, working late into the night, shaping wood by the dim glow of a kerosene lamp. His bones ached from the endless strain. But he never stopped. The twins were growing up, their laughter ringing through the house. But their school fees loomed like an insurmountable mountain. John had already sacrificed everything to get them to school. And now, with their education advancing, the costs were only increasing. It was then that he began to question everything. Was it worth it? Should he keep going? But the moment he looked at their faces, so full of potential and hope, the doubt vanished. He had made a promise to Sarah, and he would see it through. No matter what. As Emma and Olivia grew, so did their dreams. Emma, with her unrelenting curiosity, devoured every book she could find. She had a fire in her eyes that reminded John so much of Sarah, the same relentless pursuit of knowledge, the same thirst for more. Olivia, ever the tinkerer, would take apart old radios and clocks, trying to figure out how they worked, her small hands skillfully assembling them again. The twins were growing into young women with minds of their own. And John could see in their eyes the future they would build for themselves. But that future came at a price that John could barely afford. The once bustling carpentry shop was now quiet most days. With fewer clients and rising timber prices, John did his best to make ends meet, accepting smaller and smaller jobs just to keep the bills paid. Yet, despite the struggle, there was something in the air, something that reminded him that he had not given up. It was the sound of his daughters, their voices lifting in song as they helped him sweep the workshop or laughed as they picked through the discarded wood. They were his everything, his reason for pushing forward. One evening, after a particularly long day, John stood at the window, watching the setting sun bleed into the horizon. He had a moment of clarity, a rare moment of peace in a life that had become consumed by the fight to provide. The twins were in bed, their small bodies curled up together, and for the first time in weeks, John allowed himself to breathe. He could hear Sarah's voice in the back of his mind, whispering through the winds of time, urging him to keep going. You're doing it for them, John. They need you. He wiped a tear from his eye and turned back to the girls. Sleeping soundly in the next room, he could feel Sarah's presence, like a warm blanket wrapped around them, comforting them even in her absence. But even as John found some peace, the challenges were far from over. The money he earned was barely enough to cover the school fees. And the more he thought about it, the more impossible it seemed to keep up. Then, in a moment of desperation, he began to consider the unthinkable, remarrying. Not for love, but for the sake of financial security. A partnership to help share the load. It wasn't something he wanted, but it was a thought that lingered in his mind, growing like a seed of doubt. He didn't want to fail his daughters. And yet, it seemed like failure was always one step behind him. That was when Clara entered their lives. She was a soft-spoken, kind-hearted woman, recently widowed like him, and for a moment, John allowed himself to hope. She was everything he needed, gentle, understanding, and patient with the girls. She praised his work, admired the furniture he crafted, and promised to care for the girls like they were her own. The prospect of a family once again, of someone to share the burdens of life, seemed like a dream. For the first time in years, John believed that maybe, just maybe, they had a second chance. But like everything in his life, that hope proved to be fleeting. After just 6 months of marriage, Clara's true nature began to reveal itself. She had once been patient, kind, even loving toward Emma and Olivia. But that kindness quickly faded. One fateful afternoon, after a long day in the workshop, John returned home to the sound of furious shouting. Clara was standing over the twins, her face twisted with anger. "Bastard twins," she hissed, her words laced with venom. The sight of her towering over Emma and Olivia, her wooden spoon raised in anger, shattered John's heart. In an instant, everything he had built, the promise to Sarah, the hope for a new beginning, seemed to crumble. Without thinking, John stepped between them, his voice shaking with fury. "Touch them again, and you'll answer to me." Clara's eyes burned with disdain as she spat out her cruel words, mocking him for his devotion to his daughters. "You think anyone else will want a man cursed with motherless girls?" With that, she packed her things and left, slamming the door behind her, leaving John standing in the wreckage of yet another broken dream. The grief, the anger, the disappointment, it all flooded through John. But amidst the chaos, there was one thing that remained untouched: his love for Emma and Olivia. They were his world, his reason for everything. And so, he made another vow, one even stronger than before. "Never again," he whispered, as he knelt beside their beds, his hands trembling. "Never again will I let anyone hurt you." The promise hung in the air, unbreakable, unwavering. From that moment on, John's resolve was sharper than ever. He would raise these girls. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifices, he would never fail them again. The world could judge him, the neighbors could whisper, but John Duncan no longer cared. His love for Emma and Olivia was enough to carry them through anything. He was their father, and that was all that mattered. The future, uncertain and frail as it seemed, was theirs to take, and he would be there, every step of the way, guarding their dreams with everything he had left. The years that followed were a testament to the fierce determination that coursed through John Duncan's veins. Each day, he fought not just to survive, but to give Emma and Olivia the life they deserved, a life that would be defined by education, opportunity, and love. Though the wounds of the past lingered, they no longer held him captive. He had no time for grief anymore, no room for regret. There was only one thing left to do: provide, protect, and make sure that his daughters grew into the women they were destined to be. The struggles of those early years, when John barely managed to keep the roof over their heads, seemed like distant memories, yet the pressure never truly lifted. He had sold everything: his business, his home, his future, and put it all into the one thing that mattered: Emma and Olivia's education. But as the girls grew, so did the costs: school fees, textbooks, uniforms, and after-school programs. Each demand felt like a mountain too steep to climb. John's carpentry business, though steady, was never going to provide the cushion they needed. And still, he carved, he hammered, he built, one piece of furniture after another. He worked in the quiet hours of the night, his calloused hands shaping wood as he dreamed of a better future for his daughters. A future where they would not have to fight for every step forward. As he had. There were moments, though, when the weight of it all nearly broke him. After long, tiring days in the workshop, John would return home to find the girls, now teenagers, full of laughter and life, oblivious to the sacrifices he was making. The sight of them always lifted his spirits. But deep down, the truth lingered: he was barely keeping it together. There were days when his body ached so much from exhaustion that even the thought of working felt like an insurmountable task. The tension between doing what was right for them and the reality of his limitations grew. He began to wonder if he could keep going, if he could continue bearing the weight of the world alone. But every time he saw Emma's bright eyes sparkling with curiosity, or Olivia's steady determination as she tinkered with the broken radios in the corner, his resolve would harden. He could never stop. Not now. Not when they had already sacrificed so much to get here. They were on the verge of something great. He could feel it in his bones. They were smart, driven, talented girls, and all he had to do was make sure they had the opportunities to chase their dreams. And then came the breakthrough. Emma had always been fascinated with science, her eyes lighting up with every new concept she learned, her mind hungry for more. Olivia, ever the engineer, was constantly taking things apart and figuring out how to put them back together. John had watched, amazed, as they grew into young women whose potential seemed limitless. The seeds he had planted in their early childhood, his tireless work, the nights spent teaching them what he could, the stories about their mother that kept her alive in their hearts, had grown into a quiet, unshakable belief that they could achieve anything. But it wasn't just about school anymore. It was about preparing them for a future that would require more than just education. It would require tenacity, grit, and the willingness to fight for what they wanted. And so, when Emma came to him one evening with a plan to become a pilot, John could only smile, his heart swelling with pride. She wanted to fly, and nothing in the world would stop her. Olivia, too, had dreams of her own, dreams that involved engineering and technology, building things that could change the world. Together, they had grown into women with a vision for the future. And John could see it. They were ready to take flight. But their dreams were not without their challenges. School fees continued to climb, and John found himself looking for new ways to make ends meet. The old carpentry shop that had once been a source of pride was no longer enough to cover everything. He picked up odd jobs when he could, worked through the night, and started taking on more clients, pushing himself beyond what he had ever thought possible. Yet, despite all the late nights and all the extra work, the stress was beginning to show. His body, worn down by years of labor, was starting to betray him. But the sight of Emma and Olivia, their faces full of determination, was enough to keep him going. And then, just as he had started to lose hope, a man came into his life, someone who would offer him an unexpected chance. A businessman who had admired his work suggested that John open a showroom in the city. The opportunity was a dream come true. But John couldn't afford the risks. He couldn't afford to dream that big. The city was a world far beyond his reach. A world of high costs and fierce competition. Still, the words lingered in his mind. And for the first time in years, John allowed himself to imagine a future where his hard work might actually pay off. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. One day, government inspectors arrived, citing new regulations and demanding costly upgrades to his workshop. Compliance would require more money than John had earned in the past year. And as he sat at the table with the closure notice, the weight of it all nearly broke him. His entire world, his livelihood, his future, His daughter's future was crumbling. It was a moment of desperation. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Was it worth it? Was the dream of providing for his daughters just that, an unattainable dream? But John couldn't let himself give up. He couldn't let the dream die. He had promised Sarah that he would give their daughters a chance. And he would honor that promise, no matter what. So, he did what he had to do. He sold the last thing he had, his beloved carpentry shop, the very place that had been the foundation of his family's survival. With a heavy heart, he signed the papers and walked away from the only thing that had ever defined him as a man. But in that moment, he knew he had done the right thing. He had sacrificed everything for them. And in that sacrifice, he would find his redemption. The girls, now 13, were the light in his life. Even in the face of his own personal despair, they remained strong, supportive, and determined to succeed. Together, they found ways to make ends meet. They built birdhouses from discarded wood, sold them at the market, and saved every penny they earned. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. And as the months passed, John found himself slowly rebuilding, one piece at a time, just as he had always done. He may have lost the shop, but he had gained something far more important, a sense of purpose that no hardship could strip away. His daughters were thriving, and that was all that mattered. And when Emma came to him one day, eyes shining with excitement, and told him she had been accepted into a prestigious aviation school, John could only smile, his heart swelling with pride. Olivia, too, had found her own path, her engineering talents earning her a spot at a top university. Through all the struggles, through all the sacrifices, John had done it. He had raised two strong, brilliant young women who would go on to change the world. And as they stepped into their futures, John knew that the sacrifices had been worth it. He had given everything, and in return, they had given him the one thing he needed most, hope for the future. The years of sacrifice, struggle, and quiet perseverance had shaped John Duncan into a man who no longer saw the world through the lens of his own hardships. His focus had shifted entirely to Emma and Olivia. Their future was now the only thing that mattered. But even as they thrived, the road to success was still paved with challenges, each more daunting than the last. Emma's acceptance into a prestigious aviation school had been the first glimmer of hope that John had allowed himself to truly embrace. His daughter, the girl who had once looked up to him with wide eyes filled with wonder, was now ready to fly. And Olivia, with her relentless curiosity and genius for mechanics, had set her sights on an engineering career that seemed just as boundless as the sky Emma would soon navigate. They were ready to conquer the world, and John was determined to see them through it. But the weight of the world didn't lift with their success. With tuition fees climbing higher and higher, John's days were filled with worry, his nights restless. The money he had scraped together from odd jobs and the little commissions he still managed to secure from his dwindling carpentry business wasn't enough to keep pace with the expenses. He had already sold everything once, every tool, every piece of his life that he could part with. But now, as the looming threat of their futures hung above him, John felt himself being squeezed from all sides. Emma's ambition to become a pilot, Olivia's dreams of transforming the world with her inventions. These were dreams that could not be held together with the fragile threads of a fading carpentry shop and a stubborn father's pride. Then came the inevitable. John found himself standing at the edge of a decision that would make him feel as though he were sacrificing everything once again. A man approached him with an offer that seemed too good to be true. The man was from the city, a businessman who had admired John's work from a distance and saw potential in the intricate wooden furniture he crafted. "Why not open a showroom in the city?" the man suggested. His words tinged with the allure of a new beginning. For a moment, John was tempted, his heart racing at the thought of finally providing for his daughters without the constant strain of scraping by. But he knew that the city was an entirely different world, one that required more than just skill with a chisel. It required money, connections, and a security that John didn't have. The risks were too great. And so, with a heavy heart, he let the dream slip away. Just as his hope began to wane, fate seemed to take one final cruel twist. Government inspectors arrived with a mandate for new permits and safety upgrades. Compliance would cost more than John's entire year's worth of earnings. He tried to plead for more time, but it was no use. He had no choice but to shut the shop down. The news hit him like a punch to the gut. leaving him breathless. He stood alone in the empty space, his tools gathering dust, the smell of sawdust a silent reminder of everything he had lost, and everything he had given. The life he had worked so hard to build, the sweat and the years of grinding work, had been for nothing. It was all slipping through his fingers. But even in the depths of his despair, John could not let go of the only thing that still gave him purpose: Emma and Olivia. They had seen him struggle, had watched him sacrifice everything for them, and it had always been enough. He had made promises to Sarah that he would never break, and though he felt as though he was standing at the edge of a precipice, he knew that he could not give up. Not now, not when the girls were so close to their dreams. With no other option, John made the most difficult decision of all. He sold the one thing he had left. His shop, his legacy, the place that had been his identity for so many years, was gone. He signed the papers with trembling hands, his heart breaking with each stroke of the pen. But as the reality of the loss settled in, he realized something. It wasn't the shop that defined him. It was the promise he had made, the love he had for his daughters, the way he had shaped their lives with his bare hands. That was what mattered. The girls still had a future that would not be derailed by the loss of a building or the fading echoes of a long-fought battle. They had each other. They had hope. And in that moment, John understood. He had done all he could to give them the life they deserved. And now it was their turn to make it their own. The months that followed were filled with a new kind of struggle. John took on whatever work he could find, even cleaning offices to make ends meet. The days were long, the hours grueling, but he never complained. Emma and Olivia, though burdened with the knowledge of their father's sacrifices, continued to thrive. They worked part-time jobs, saved their money, and when the opportunity arose, they both secured partial scholarships to help with their tuition. John watched, both in awe and pride, as they navigated the challenges of their education with the same fierce determination he had instilled in them. Then came the day that Emma received her first internship offer, followed shortly by Olivia's success in a design competition. The weight on John's chest lifted just a little. His daughters were proving him right. All the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, all the pain, everything was worth it. They had done it. And in that moment, as Emma stood before him, her face alight with the excitement of her achievements, John realized something else. He had made it through. They had made it through. Together. The world may have doubted him. The town may have whispered that he was foolish, that he was sacrificing too much for girls who would one day leave him behind. But they were wrong. Emma and Olivia had stayed. They had stayed true to their dreams, to the promise of a future they would build together. And John? He had given them the tools to do it. He had given them everything. And in return, they had given him a legacy that no one could ever take away. As the years passed, the world around John Duncan began to change, but he remained steadfast in his commitment to his daughters. Emma and Olivia had grown into remarkable young women, each carving her own path toward a future that had once seemed out of reach. Yet, for all their achievements, the fight was far from over. The scars of the past still lingered. The sacrifices still weighed heavy. But John could see the fruits of his labor in every step they took toward their dreams. The road had been long, and it had been hard, but they were finally standing at the precipice of something incredible. When Emma walked across the stage at her graduation, John couldn't contain the tears that welled up in his eyes. She was everything he had hoped for and more, a pilot in the making. Standing on the threshold of a future she had built with her own hands. Her success was a reflection of his sacrifices, a testament to the countless sleepless nights, the work he had poured into every piece of furniture, every meal he had cooked, every tear he had wiped away. She had achieved something extraordinary, and John felt a deep, profound pride in his heart that he could hardly put into words. As he watched her stand there, her gaze fixed ahead, John realized that this was what he had fought for all those years, the chance to give Emma the freedom to chase her dreams without hesitation. Olivia, too, had found her own place in the world. She had always been the more introverted of the two, often spending hours tinkering with broken radios or sketching designs for machines in her notebook. It was no surprise to John when she excelled in mechanical engineering, her natural talent for problem-solving and innovation shining through. The same fierce determination that had seen her through childhood carried her into university, where she would go on to revolutionize the field with her designs. Olivia had a mind that could see the world in ways others couldn't. and her ambition burned as brightly as Emma's. She was on a path to change the world, and John couldn't have been prouder. But just as the future seemed full of promise, the past came rushing back, like a tidal wave threatening to drown everything John had worked for. The whispers of the community, the doubts they had cast on his choices. Why did he sacrifice everything for girls? What would become of him when they left, began to resurface, haunting him like ghosts of regrets that had never truly gone away. The truth was, John had always feared this moment, the moment when Emma and Olivia would move on, when they would find their own lives, their own families, and he would be left alone again. It was a fear he had buried deep inside. But now, with both of them poised to take flight, it bubbled to the surface. He had given them everything, sacrificed everything, but what was left for him? The thought was fleeting, gone as quickly as it had come. The reality of what mattered in that moment was clear. His daughters were ready to soar. They had built their dreams on the foundation he had given them. And now they were ready to leave the nest. John couldn't hold them back. And so, as their graduation day approached, as the moment of departure loomed, John made his peace with the inevitable. He would never be the same without them. But he had to let go. His love for them had always been unconditional. But now it was time for them to walk their own paths, to become the women they had always dreamed of being. The day they left was bittersweet. John had never expected to feel this kind of emptiness, the kind that echoed through the walls of their small home, now quieter than it had ever been. He stood at the door, watching them pack up their things, each one with their own suitcase of dreams, their own future just beginning. He had been their everything for so long, and now, they were stepping into a world that would require them to rely on no one but themselves. The thought was both freeing and painful. But in the midst of the sadness, something beautiful happened. Emma, her eyes sparkling with excitement, took a moment to turn to her father. "Papa, you know we'll always need you, right?" she said, her voice breaking through the weight of the moment. Olivia, ever the practical one, nodded in agreement. "You've given us everything. Now it's our turn to make you proud." The words hit John like a wave, sweeping over him, filling the empty space in his chest with something he hadn't realized he had been missing: hope. And so, as they drove away, John stood in the driveway, watching them disappear down the road, his heart both heavy and full. He had given them the world, and in return, they had given him something far more valuable: the knowledge that his sacrifices hadn't been in vain. They would never forget him. Never forget the love and the lessons he had given them. As the car turned the corner and disappeared from view, John felt something shift inside of him. It was as if he had just set them free. And in doing so, he had freed himself as well. The house was empty now. But John knew it was only for a time. Emma and Olivia would return, just as they had promised. And when they did, he would be there, waiting for them with open arms, ready to hear about their adventures, their triumphs, and the worlds they had conquered. But for now, he would take a deep breath and let the silence settle around him, knowing that the love he had given his daughters was the greatest legacy he could ever leave behind. And in that quiet, John Duncan found peace, for himself, for his girls, and for the journey they had all shared.